Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for coming in. We're going to have a good one starting out this fall season. We're going to be working out a few bugs. We've got a new Blog Talk beta system that they're working through, so we're going to work through it with them. We've got a very special guest. Mr. Gil Broussard is going to be with us from the Planet 7X series. That he also has a YouTube channel called Planet 7X and a website up. But Gil, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this. We've been covering your videos for the last few days and your information about Planet 7X, and it's captivated the attention of so many people, including myself. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Jesse, and I want to apologize for some of your guests having trouble to download the book that I offer free, because there's too many people trying to download it at the same time, so they have to wait 24 hours for Dropbox to reset the server, I guess, or whatever it is. Yeah.
I got you, and that's on your planet7x.com website, Gil. Is that the correct address?
Most of my information is really underneath the videos. If they go under the videos, there's a link. They go to Dropbox for information, and it opens up. The first one is for the book, and then the other ones are for reference files, whether it's the Hebrew or like the Aramaic or whatever references that I'm able to furnish for people.
I got you.
So they can retrieve it for free.
Well, again, on the last 3 or 4 videos, guys, I think I have all of Gil's links there, and we'll put them up again here before the show's over if you need to do that. But again, YouTube is Planet 7X, and I believe I'm right on planet7x.com. But Gil, we were talking the other day, and you brought up so many interesting things that with someone like me, it would take a month to sort through it, and each time I find a different aspect of what you're talking about, it leads down an entire new trail of research. And to me, that's a good thing because I enjoy it so much. I enjoy finding out these things and sharing them with the audience. Of course, everyone's big question is an arrival time. We're talking about Planet 7X coming in to our inner solar system, or the effects of it. And I've heard you say before that there's no way to put a definite time until there's a sighting. Could you talk about that a moment with us?
Right. We have a planet-sized object that has not a set time for its orbit. And the reason for that is because it's on the planetary plane, and that's where most of the objects are in the universe. And I can clearly point out a time frame where it really changed things. This was during just before the time of the Exodus, where it appears that it collided with the planet Ceres, and that's what made it's a debris field that we call the asteroid belt today. Well, that slowed down the forward speed to about 1/20th of its normal, and that caused the 3 days of darkness instead of 3 hours of darkness like during Yeshua's sacrifice. So it didn't have the momentum when it went around the sun to bring it into a deep orbit. It only had a shallow orbit, about 52 years, where it came back to Joshua's long day. Then after that, it went around the sun, picked up a little bit more speed, went 131 years. Later, it showed up to Job's trouble and the drought of Ruth. Picked up a little bit more speed, and then at 136 years, it ended up coming to the time of David and King Saul's period, where there was a drought of seven years, and then it finally came to a full orbit of 358. And that brought it to King Hezekiah, where the calendar changed from 360 days to 365 days. So it really depends on what it's bumping into, and as it's going through its travel, if it doesn't hit anything, it has a fairly constant orbit, but you also have the gravity of the other planets that can influence it. So we have normally if an object is off the planetary plane coming at an angle, there's not enough, well, there isn't any objects except some random pieces that may interfere with an object's orbit. Therefore, it can be timed just like a Swiss watch for it to come back on its normal trip, but not this item because it's on the planetary plane of Earth, and that's where most of the objects are.
That's right. I'm actually working on some information about that. I may have it up this afternoon, maybe tomorrow, about actually where, Gil, they have 3 of our major infrared telescopes pointing right now. And it's very interesting, the area, and they're picking up a lot of information from that one spot. But I have the models, and it would take too long to go into it now, except they are looking. Now, it's slightly above the ecliptic and the slightly north. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you would be almost northwest in the sky. But again, I'll have to show the models because a picture's worth 1,000 words on that deal. But they definitely have both the Hubble, the IRAS, the Spitzer, and one of the other new satellites aimed at one specific point. And that's very interesting. And they're analyzing the data. They get so much in that it takes them actually months to go through this infrared information. And they will compare plates from one month to the next as far as background stars to determine the movement. But that will be up, and they definitely have all the money looking in one location right now.
Well, keep in mind, Jesse, we have 3 6 points. Okay, if it fulfills the biblical narrative as well as what the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean astronomers saw, this object crosses Earth's path twice, with roughly 150 to 152 days apart. Modern time, it's 152 days. If it had been with a calendar year of 360 days, it'd be 150 days apart. But because we have a 365 and a quarter day, it's actually 152 days. So the other 6 point is the center of the sun, where all objects are kind of like hinged to or pivot from. So we have 3 6 points. That means for the debris field, if this object is 7 times the size of Earth, for the debris field to miss Earth, it can't be more than 2/10 of a degree off the ecliptic. Otherwise, we have nothing to worry about. It's a debris field would miss it. So that's why when people point to things that are off the ecliptic and out of the Sagittarius and group there, I just say, well, that's not our object. It might be an object that's too far away to run into problems for us in the present. There's multiple qualifiers, but one of them for right now, it needs to be on the ecliptic coming out of Sagittarius or to the left of Sagittarius. And
I got.
And right now,
in order for, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, for it to follow the present data we have, most people don't have data. It's random. They're trying, but we have data using the Chinese records, and I believe the only reason why we have those records is because it was mislabeled as a supernova, and and we have white paper reports proving it's not a supernova because it moved through multiple constellations. Supernovas are stationary; they will not have different constellations that they're seen in.
Exactly right, and I can't ever remember in history one being visible, especially in the daytime, for that long amount of period of time, Gil. Another thing I noticed was that you were talking about in, I think, March 26th of next year, 2016, and you put that we were talking about it in your video that this thing would probably be visible coming in by watching Virgo with Leo just above it on that date. And we looked at it on Stellarium. And what's interesting is Mr. Harrington, who was one of the people that was looking for the Planet X, and they actually had data on that. and he ended up mysteriously dying. But he said that he thought it would be coming up in Gemini to the right of your location. Now, the other scientist he was working with said he thought that we should be looking at Scorpio. And if you look at, and I drew a line, I pulled them both up on Stellarium on March 26, 2016. Your location was dead in the middle of both of their estimates, and it would be on the ecliptic. In other words, when those three events, right before Gemini goes down, and as Gemini's going down, Scorpio's rising to the left, your point with the Virgo with their foot over the moon is dead in the center on the ecliptic coming in at that point. It's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to, that amazed me, just that fact. And what got my attention about your videos is that chart where you showed that instead of a supernova would be in one location at all times as the Earth turned, it would still be being reported at the same place. But there were people coming in from Baghdad, from Japan, China, Korea, I think it was, showing that they had seen it from their location, and you used that information to actually chart the incoming and outgoing orbit, and which, by the way, would give you that it passing the Earth twice because of the incoming and outgoing orbit. We've seen it on big comets and things like that. But it was extremely accurate, Gil, for you to be dead in the middle of Mr. Harrington and the other scientists on their predictions.
And then again, there's 88 constellations. What are the odds of us reversing the model from the date given on March 26th on the Revelation, and we reverse the model, and I call it thread. It actually threads the needle, places you in between the Voyager and Pioneer probes. Out of 88 constellations, it just doesn't hit the same constellation. It threads the needle between the two, exact angle, and it's exact distance being on the ecliptic. You see? And this is the only way that we can have a double eclipse, a double meteor shower, as reference to Revelation 6 and 7, which it says 5 months apart. 5 months is 150 or 152 days apart. And the math doesn't allow it to be off the ecliptic. And for it to have a rendezvous on Passover, remember Elijah shows up on the Feast of Passover. And the date given on this is 3.5 days after that. Well, Elijah announces, remember how they're dead for 3.5 days? And then they're prophesied for 1,260 days? Well, the word prophesied means to speak. They can't speak if they're dead. So how many days are there on earth? 3.5 days longer than the bride that goes into hiding. That's exactly the period of time from the Feast of Passover on a full moon to the date given in Revelation 12:1. That was given to us 2,000 years ago, and I can tell you with a fact, if no man living can give us that date, even if they had software 2,000 years ago, because they would have to compensate for a 12-hour delay in the Earth's rotation from a viewpoint from Jerusalem at midnight and know something that we don't even know today. What was the date of the orbit of this planet coming in? See, that's an unknown item.
Yeah,
and
that coincides with the 100.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Gil, go ahead.
No, you can go
ahead. We may
ahead.
have a slight delay here. I was just going to say that coincides with the 150 days of Noah's time. And could have been from you talked about that. There's 150 days or 5 months mentioned there. There's 5 months of the locust army in Revelation. 2 times those dates are mentioned.
Remember, he said in the end times it'd be like the time of Noah. We didn't know to what extent that he meant that. And now we know it's the mirroring of the entry and exit. There's outside text that says Remember, in our Bible it said the floodgates of heaven, and the floodgates is plural. There's outside text that says 7 floodgates were open. I think 7 meteors punctured the canopy of water that was above the earth, and took 40 days for it to empty out, and that flooded the earth. 150 days later, a large meteor the size of a mountain, like in Revelation. Remember, it says a fiery mountain hit the earth 5 months apart. That in Noah's flood, there was a large meteor that hit Earth. That formed the Gulf of Mexico. The opposite side of Earth, 71% of its crust was ejected off of it. Then the water could recede into that area, which is our oceans today. And that debris ended up forming the moon. The volume of our moon is the exact volume of our ocean. If you put the moon back where our ocean is, you basically have a flooded Earth, except for the Himalayas. But the Himalayas were made in fractions of seconds during this event, and so what's interesting is the moon has no magnetic field, but yet material tested shows that it's slightly magnetic. Okay, so how does it get a magnetic field, to the objects, the material on it, but yet there's no magnetic field because there's no core? Secondly, they found iron ore that's rusty. It has rust on it from samples from the moon. Well, you can't have rust without an atmosphere and water. So how did that happen since the moon has never had an atmosphere or water? And there's water erosion. If you put up,
right.
If you add it all together, the moon definitely came from the Earth, but it was during the state that when it had water and when we had a magnetic field, that meant the fully formed Earth. It was, so we have a logical model that proves this out now.
Well, even the ancients in the Sumerian texts talk about an event like that called Tiamat, where a collision caused the formation of the moon also, Gil. So that's not far-fetched at all, because it's ancient, some of the oldest writings known to man, but they mention that very event at that point.
Yeah, I can't make much comment on those ancient writings because I don't have a model for it or to prove it out, or there's any other writings to back it up. So I'll just leave it as it is.
I understand. Well, we were talking about what feast dates are you looking at in this coming spring? You're looking at Passover for 2016?
Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot predict the future. All I'm saying is when you read Revelation 12:1, you know a little bit of astronomy. It's shocking it matches the past models of an entry and exit.
Right.
It matches the exit part of the model, which is in March. And it also matches the customs of the Hebrews that Elijah will show up on the Feast of Passover. 3.5 days later, mid of week, mid of night, the Messiah returns. But this is not called a rapture. It is called a taking away, but it's not the taking away to heaven. There's 2 taking aways in the Bible. People try to put them together, but there's one. There's 2. One at the beginning of the 3.5 and one at the end. The one at the beginning is the remnant is taken to the wilderness for a time, 3.5 years. Okay, that's the one we're talking about, where the groom comes pick up his bride. It follows a Hebrew wedding, where she's brought to her chamber prior to the wedding and the feast. Okay, so then 3.5 years later, you can be anywhere on the earth, and you're raptured. You're taken away to heaven, the dead are first, and then the living. The terms quoted with each taking away are totally different, and we shouldn't change them. They're exactly correct, but it's where you position them. Remnant is never meant the entire unit of measure. Remnant means a part of. And wilderness never meant heaven. It meant affection. It just, if we leave it the way it states, it falls in place with the Hebrew wedding, reference. And so,
yep.
Put it this way, that date greatly concerns me. We won't have a verification until we see it. And it'll look like a comet. It will not look like a planet, per se. It'll look more like a comet because it's crossing the solar winds with a magnetic field, and that will cause a tail. And so be aware of a comet coming out of Sagittarius, and that it's on the ecliptic. If it meets those two qualifiers, that's our object.
Gotcha.
And so that's what we're waiting for. I think we have some interference at the present because there is no sighting at the moment, none that is valid. At least not in the public realm. And until we have verification of 2, 3 amateur astronomers or professional, then we can qualify the date and the time. But right now, it's we may have. I've asked some high level people within agencies. I won't name the agent. I don't want to get the people in trouble. Have called me and they said when they looked at my information that this connected data, the dots connected for them on projects that they worked on. Whenever they saw this, the data that was put up, that the dots connected. And so while I had these high-level officials here, I asked them, I said, is there a way for the government to block our view, whether it's hologram, plasma, or whatever means of it? And they gave a short answer, yes. They would not qualify how or what they're using, but they gave a short answer of yes. So if we have interference, we have to wait for it to come closer, where it forms the tail, the plasma tail. After that, they can't block it. And that's where I'm expecting, you'll see a Middle East war crank off to get people's attention away from the skies. And about a month after that war start looking up.
Well, it doesn't look like we're very far from that war. If you ask the people of Syria, it's pretty well going on, and we see the tensions rising. You see ISIS surrounding Israel.
War is seal 4, but seal 3 has to happen before 4. Seal 3 is economic collapse, and I would personally recommend, and that's my own choice. I can't biblically, there is a few things that says the Middle East will rise and the economic and high power, but I would recommend maybe a couple $100 for people to buy some of the Iraqi dinar. If it goes up like we think it's going to go up, the dollar's going to be going down and the euro's going to be down. I think there's a very high chance of a good potential gain. Just recently, it's been noted in the data that they published that they just tested what's that banking? I can't remember the term. It starts with an S. There's a code between banks for transferring money, and they just got issued their code to be able to transfer money, and they pinged it, making sure all of the channels are open and ready. And they're also having meetings with the international banking system. So I think it's fairly close that they may be evaluating, because they did a lot of changes and headway this year towards that. So we'll have to see.
One of the things that you had mentioned was about some of the Middle East prophecies in Islam, and that what some call the Mahdi would be in power 7 years up until this point. And we know who's been in power here for 7 years. Something else about that, after you told me that on the phone the other day, I started looking into it, and it also fits another piece of criteria that's in our Bible about the 3.5 years, about the Antichrist will make a covenant for 7 years, but will break it in the middle of the week at 3.5 years. And I traced that back, and our current president was put in January 22nd, 2009. On July the 12th, 2012, exactly 3.5 years later, the headlines in the New York Times was, for the first time in history, the United States has turned its back on Israel, and kind of sold them out over the Iranian deal even back then. And I remember making headlines, but it immediately made me think about what you were talking about. There's too many signs pointing to 2016 as a major year.
Yes, you see, Seal 5 is pertaining to the peace agreement. Remember how the souls are complaining to God, why haven't you revenged us yet? Where is our pound of flesh, basically? And he says, go back to sleep. It's not your time, because they're witnessing a peace agreement being signed. If this March 26th is the date, and I qualified, if it is the date, we can use Daniel's numbers and find out where the peace agreement, and it puts us around January 11th of a signing of a peace agreement. It puts the 40-day warning of Jonah around in February. And then, and that means before January, you have to have Seal 3 and 4, which is Seal 3 is economic collapse, and Seal 4 is war and pandemic disease. A quarter of the world population would die of these diseases, and that's going to cause a great falling away. Remember, Yeshua said, before I return, there'll be a great falling away. Because they were told of a rapture that's not going to happen yet, they put it in the wrong place. Many people are going to die because they're not prepared for this. You need 1 year food. This is what's called a Sabbath year. The people who own the land they place away 1 year food, which is on the 6th year. We're in the 7th year where the poor are able to gather into the fields and get their supplies. Okay? The last 6 months of that Sabbath year is where it's going to get rough. Start around September. Around September, and the end somewhere around there is where that last 6 months starts. And you need to have at least 6 months of food supplies, because we're going to have a cyber attack. We're going to have our utilities are going to go off and on, just like a hurricane. That you can't rely on it. It's similar to that. You have to have similar supplies. And therefore, that's what's going to cause a great falling away. When FEMA comes up and starts forming food lines, and you have to stand in line, and some people in the line are sick, spreading the diseases mentioned in the Bible, and they see their loved ones dying and their life savings vaporized because the economy's falling, and there's a great falling away from, they think, the word, because they think, God doesn't exist. No, it's your interpretation that's wrong. Not that God doesn't exist, you see, because they were told something without all of the information being present. We're just now getting this information. They better lay this out correctly. You see. Well,
Christ told us 3 times in the New Testament, in Mark 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, that in those days after the tribulation, Gil, just like you're saying, after the tribulation, they shall see the Son of Man coming. And the confusion is the difference in the tribulation Christ is talking about, and then the latter wrath of God. And they have been confused. But it's not anyone's fault but each individual, because the Bible in Timothy tells us to study to show yourself approved. And just like you said and others have said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So when you listen if you listen to a preacher and you don't open the book and double check him out, then you're only putting yourself at jeopardy. Always study and look at it. But again, and the letters in red are the most important in the New Testament. And if Christ says 3 times for emphasis, after the tribulation you'll see me, that should be enough to override what any man tells you.
That's a good point. Let me bring a little bit more to light. Remember where it says nation against nation?
Right.
The nation he's talking about is Jacob and Esau. That's in Matthew, I think 24:7, where he talks about that. Okay, that's basically Islam against Jews and Christians. Is what it adds up basically talking about. Okay, and and that started in year 2001. Seal 1 was a leader is chosen to make war. Chosen, okay? Bin Laden was chosen by the mullahs to make a jihad against the other nations, the Jacob nation, basically. All right? Seal 2 is the attack, September 11th. Peace is taken from the earth in 1 hour. Now, that was a Shemitah, a Sabbath year. All contracts end at the end of that Shemitah. So we start the next 7 after that. Now, if you want to know what Jacob's trouble is, remember, the war is declared on Jacob. Jacob's trouble, you want to find a time frame, you go to marriage. You go look at what Jacob went through to get his wife. And we're opposite. Okay, we're the bride, and we're talking about the groom. Remember how he worked 7 years before, and he was tricked and didn't know the identity, and it was a false bride? Well, if you reverse it, it's a false groom. In 208, we got tricked. Didn't know anything about somebody. They called in the Messiah, some people. Now we have to wait another 7 years, okay? And then after this 7 years, it is a jubilee. At the beginning of the jubilee is the marriage. Beginning of the marriage. That's why Elijah comes back and sits at the table of the feast and says the groom is coming. So Jacob's trouble has already started. We're in, the word tribulation means trouble. We're in trouble, but it's going to escalate even higher now. We're going to go, that was, call it the smaller trouble. Now we're going to go to the mid area of trouble. 3, 4, then there's a peace agreement. That's seal 5. Then we're going to go into the great tribulation. That great tribulation is the earth has never seen before. This is the type of trouble that is the greatest in all of Earth's history, it says. We're fixing to live through the most significant point in all of biblical history. And that's the great tribulation. And he will come and you take a remnant to the wilderness, and whether or not you'll decide to follow his timing pattern, but the bride and the bridemaid has to be at her home for the bride, for the groom to pick her up. Her home is the old Jerusalem. Her new home is the new Jerusalem. In between that, she has to go to her chamber prior to the marriage. The chamber is the wilderness. It follows a Hebrew wedding, not a Western wedding. And when you read it in that perspective, with the Hebrew and with the overlay of the stars and what happened in Noah and all of these data points that are in the Bible, all of these stories are data points. You see that these stories are not random. It's filling the missing gaps we missed.
I understand. You look at the prophecy, And then if you look around the world at what the other religions are looking at as far as prophecy, it's amazing how close that, especially the two religions we're talking about right now, between, you're talking about Ishmael and Isaac, basically, is that right now you see the rise of ISIS. You see it surrounding Israel, it's going through Iraq, going through Syria, giving people trouble all the way around Israel as they are approaching. Yesterday, I think it was, they blew up an Israeli ship with a rocket. Well, if you look at their predictions, which is ancient also, they were there at this time, of what the end times are going to be like. They're talking about the same time that you're talking about, what we've been looking at. But they believe what they call the Mahdi, again, is they're the guided one, I think is what that means. But it says that what they're looking for is the vast majority of people, this will be the events, who profess to be Muslim will be so only in name, despite their practice of Islamic rites, and it will be they who will make war with the Mahdi, which will be the return of the Islamic savior in a way. Now, if you think about that, they are fighting, the Islamic people are fighting. You've got Saudi Arabia bombing tribes in Yemen that are coming out of Iran. And it says also, before his coming, we will see the Red Death and the White Death. Again, this is Islamic tradition, killing 2/3 of the world's population. The Red Death signifies violence, and the White Death is a plague. 1/3 of the world's population will die from the Red Death, the other third from the White Death. Then certain figures will appear. One of them is who they call Isa, I-S-A, Christ, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. They think that the Mahdi will come before Christ, which could be very correct. They think that he will set up a new one-world religion. Now, that fits into our timing, but what it's doing is identifying the Antichrist. The other thing is this is old writing. There will be a great conflict in the land of Syria until it's destroyed. We almost see that. Death and fear will affect the people of Baghdad and Iraq. Listen to this. A fire will appear in the sky, and redness will cover them. That's what they're looking for right before the return. And like you said, they said this leader would have to be in power for 7 years.
Let me give you a little qualifier based on that.
Okay.
Okay. He can't have the title of Mahdi. He has to perform his miracle, which our Bible says is a false miracle, because we already know what the miracle is going to be now. Okay. So before he creates his miracle, before he gains his title as Mahdi, he's a regular man in the political arena, and he's a world leader for 7 years, and that he will bring in a peace agreement, to the Middle East, and that there'll be a sign in the heavens proclaiming that's our planet. Okay, when he forms this miracle, which is the world governments will use the astronomy model and predict the Middle East, Europe, China, that side of the earth being hit by a meteor shower. Muslims will try to get a visa to travel out of the danger zone into other countries. They will be refusing them travel or not granting them a visa because of the terrorist activities that take place in SEAL 4. And we're talking about SEAL 6 right now. So the terrorist activity that took place in SEAL 4 is the reason why they're not able to travel out of the country on SEAL 6. The Mahdi goes there and changes times and laws. The time he's going to change, he says, I am going to change the time zone by 12 hours and the law of that the earth can stop on its axis. He's going to slow down the rotation of the earth by 12 hours, like it happened in Joshua's long day. Like I'm saying, it's going to happen on this one. When Earth goes through the tail of this comet, we will lose our rotational speed of 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly for the next 24 hours, where Earth will come to a complete stop. Then you're off by 12 hours. That meant the target is on exactly the opposite side of the earth. In Islam, it says he causes fire to rain on their enemies. And the Bible tells us on our side, it says 1/3 of the grass, 1/3 of the trees, and later it says 1/3 of the rivers. They're describing continental crust. They didn't have a word for it, but that's what they're describing. When you look at a globe, what half of the globe is 1/3 of the continental? That's North and South America. The Bible is already telling us what the false miracle is going to be and what side of the earth is going to be. And he's already giving you a command: show up in Jerusalem, because you're fulfilling his rehearsal patterns. Show up in Jerusalem on Mount Zion on appointed time and date, which is we're supposed to be there for Passover. And Elijah will be there on the feast of Passover, and he will tell us the groom is coming. Then we know when he's coming. We'll fast after the feast for 3.5 days, and he will come on the day of the meteor shower. The opposite side of earth is being hit. Everybody is on the ground except for his people who are waiting for him. And we see him come out of heaven to bring us to the place of safety. It's so well timed out. It's beyond man to be able to write a story like this. It's just incredible. Because the physics have to match the story, and they didn't have the physics. We have it today. Okay? They didn't have the Kepler's laws of planetary. They didn't have any of this that we could calculate this. And it's right on. It's impossible for them to come up with, even to make up a story that follows the parameters given to us in science today. You see?
Yep. You know, something about that, if you think about it, we've all said that we're not getting all the information from our space telescopes. We have 2 that we've watched for years, stereo, A and B, that are on the backside, and they're saying they're not transmitting. That would give us a heads up visually, but those satellites have conveniently went down at that point. My point being is, Gil, if they knew about this, and this was in the grand scheme of things, and they were going to promote their leader, in other words, we're saying that, like you said, that he will be able to perform miracles before men, and bring fire down from heaven. And if they hid the event and then let him predict it, whoever this leader turns out to be, the Antichrist, let him predict it and say, I can bring fire down from heaven on the enemy, knowing that it was coming the whole time, it would fit into the scheme of things perfectly, both the hiding of the knowledge and the false miracles.
And it matches the physics, the model of the physics on what we know now of space. On the electric universe, the tail of a comet is not ice particles, it's plasma. And it will interfere with the energy going into our north and south pole and cause us to slow down on our rotational spin. And the model works out. They could not have guessed this. They couldn't.
Well, when they talk about when Christ sets his foot down on that day and you have the greatest earthquake we've ever seen, all the great earthquakes in the history of the planet have been because of close approaches of objects to our planet. Every time. And one of the things that you and I talked about on the phone was that I'm doing a video that's not up yet called The Comet of Destruction, and I actually trace Comet Halley back to 1510, and it's close approaches every 75 years or so to our planet, and the great earthquakes. And the thing about it, the closest that it was in all that time was 0.2 AU. You're talking about 20 million miles. 1 AU is not quite 100 million miles. 20 million miles from this planet with an object just that size is all it took to create magnetic interference, or what I call a magnetic slip between the Earth and the Sun. And because we're an electrical universe, what we did not have recorded at that time was what the Sun was doing at these close approaches, because we saw it with the last 2 big comets, tremendous X flares, as you have a negative charged object coming into the solar system with a positive charged sun, those reactions in themselves. But even
Sure.
at 20 million miles, Halley has brought tremendous earthquakes, leveled cities, brought storms down, and that had to be as we were going through the debris trail. Or either
the only thing I need to mention is that this object has been mislabeled as a comet in the past, and people assume that it was Halley's. On certain years, Halley's has passed at the same time of year, maybe not in the same month, but in the same year, and it's been mistaken. That's why this the data that we got to look for is something that looks like a very large comet. It does not. It doesn't look like a planet, but it is a planet, but it has a comet-like tail in orbit. And so this has to be either redefined as maybe a different category, right now I call it a planet/comet, because there's nothing recorded this large as a comet before, and it's not going to be loosely compacted material like a comet is. This is a solid body because it destroyed the planet Ceres. So, and it moved Mars in the slightly higher. It moved Pluto. Remember what you said earlier about Tiamat?
Right.
I was thinking about it while we were talking. I think I might be able to have a logical explanation, but the people who interpret this thought it was the moon. There's no record of Venus prior to the Exodus documented in any drawings or papers. If Tiamat, if the new, instead of it being the moon, if it was Venus that was created, the brightest star.
Right.
Because when Ceres collided when Planet X collided into Ceres and dropped its speed to 1/20th, if it had a moon orbiting around Planet X, it would have broke away. Because of the sudden stop of the main planet, it would have given it enough speed for it to continue on. And it relocated itself as Venus today. You see, that might explain.
That's close enough to our planet. It's close enough to our planet to make sense. It's not in the outer solar system. It's here. And everything's going to balance out between the gravity of the sun and the pull of the external planets. It will be that L1 for planets, or that zone to where they match, and then that magnetic pull from both ways. And they've talked about this object many times, and some say it may be a large object with its own debris field, or smaller planets like Ceres or something like that. What do you think about that, Gil? Because the reason I'm asking is, for instance, going back to Halley's Comet for a moment, even though it comes into our inner solar system every 75 years or so, and it will return in the year 2061, I think, it comes in at a different point as far as where Earth is at that point. And so even if an object coming in at around 390 years or so, the Earth will be in a different position and have different effects. It will have different effects because of its location. In other words, as these comets come around, sometimes they will be close to Earth. You'll have more devastating effects. Sometimes the Earth will be on the other side of the sun during the close approach. So that's just the reason I said that it's a formula you have to put in when you're trying to determine these times when it came in, how the Earth was affected depending on where it was in the inner solar system.
Yes, because it's relative to the position of Earth when it's passing through. It could be far away, it could be close. A few times it has been close. Like for Hezekiah, when it changed our year for 3, it drug Earth slightly outward, less than 0.5%. That changed our yearly calendar for 360 to 365 and a quarter. And I can prove that Earth tilted at 2 to 3 times in its past. One was during Joshua's long day. We have the sky disk of Nebra that proves out that Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees, and that there was a very unusual eclipse that took place that was not involving the moon. And then there was another one. Let's see, when was the other one? Oh, for Hezekiah. The English version has a slight error in it where it says it was 10 degrees on the sundial. In the Hebrew, it doesn't say sundial. It says steps. And if we use steps and we build a model of that, we can prove out a 26 to 28 degree tilt again. And so, which proves out it had to pass close enough to drag us outward slightly to give us a extended year. And I have to argue this point coming up here in the near future with some high-level scientists in a room.
Gil, I'm not sure if you can hear me. It just popped up that we may have lost you. If you'll call back in. But guys, you're enjoying a very good show. I know I am, and it takes a lot to get my interest, and Gil always does that. But again, we cut off for a second there, Gil. If you will call back in, I'll be looking for you on the switchboard. Guys, in the comments, the call board is so lit up. I know I can't get to everyone, but if you've got a question, I'm looking at the chat room on Blog Talk. If you've got a question there that I can ask Gil, I'll be glad to do that, because it's definitely going to be a little hard to get everybody in. We promoted the show, and you can definitely tell it from the switchboard here. But I'm going to go for just a moment. I'm going to catch the caller at the very top that's been waiting for quite a while, if you're still there, until we get Gil back on the line. Caller 919, that's your area code. If you're still with us, can you hear me? Hello, caller. I'm going to just move down the line until we get Gil back on. Again, in the comment section, if you've got questions, okay, Sergeant York, I see, ask him about November 7th, if it will be easier to see when the 5 planets align. Let me get him back on, and that will be the first thing. Call us, area code 618, are you there? You guys been holding a long time. Let's see what we got here. Gil, is that you back?
I'm here. You hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a minute there. It came on and clicked. There, we got it back. Sorry about that.
All right. Not a problem. We lost, I guess, cell phone power.
It just popped up that your call had been dropped on my switchboard, and that's when I noticed it.
I don't know at what point we ended, so you have to tell me.
Well, listen, there's a question in the chat room. Let me back up to it about the planetary alignment in November. Would we be able to see it at that point, or would there be any effect that we may see? Let me back up and see if I can find the exact questions. Chat's going pretty quick. But they were referring to a November planetary alignment, Gil. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. I really don't follow that too much.
Right.
We're definitely having effects. Remember, if you use an analogy, let's say you're going to squeeze a trigger on a gun to fire it, and you're going to put 8 pounds of pressure on it. But the trigger has a set pressure of only 4 pounds. So if you don't allow for a release, even though you're putting 8, it goes off at 4. So will we have effects when this thing lines? Yeah, it's possible. Maybe before it, but before it lines up, it's not necessarily critical that it's on that day, because there's a trip point on stresses.